Traders, if you're watching this video, it means you're interested in learning more about the indicator pivot points, but more specifically, the standard pivot points indicator. And this video is going to introduce you to that tool from a high level. And in addition to that, you're going to know how it works, especially in its settings menu. So with all indicators, head up to the indicators, metrics, and strategies menu, and just go ahead and type in pivot points here. And you're going to see a few different pivot point options. This video is going to cover the standard option. So I'm going to favorite it here so that you know how pivot points started from the beginning. Now, what we're going to do before we get this video started is we're just going to click this tooltip here into the Help Center because it's important that I do show you one thing in this video to really kick off your research, and that is the calculation for how pivot points are calculated. Now, you should know as we go through this video, there are different calculations depending on the methodology you wish to use. But just quickly, as an example here, what you're seeing is pivot points are using prices, and then they're using a systematic formula to show you levels on the chart based on those prices. But specifically, as you can see here, times 2 minus the previous low, times 2 minus the previous high, plus the previous high minus the previous low. So what you're seeing here is you have this R1 and S1. This is like your first two pivot points of the indicator. R2 and S2 are your next two pivot points of the indicator. R3 and S3, and so on. So whenever you see 1, then 2, then 3, it's sort of like the indicator or the pivot points, which are the indicator, are expanding on the chart. I'm going to show you that. But you should know that there's a calculation behind every pivot point. And there are multiple ways to calculate it. Fibonacci, Woody, Classic. We're going to go through all of them. And the first thing we need to do now is click Pivot Point Standard to get it added to the chart. Now, this is sort of what I was trying to explain. And actually what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do one. Let's just look at one pivot point for now. There we go. Just one. So we have one pivot point. We're on a daily chart of Bitcoin. Now recall what I was saying, that there are these specific calculations for each pivot point. Here's R1. And then if you see, here's S1. Here's R2. Here's S2. And you just saw the calculations for these different pivot points. But now think about these pivot points acting as support and resistance, entirely calculated off of one another. And of course, the current price action. So some people might consider it okay, so Bitcoin's here. We're on a daily chart. The first pivot point to the upside is right here. The first pivot point to the downside is down here. The next pivot point to the upside, if it breaks through this level here, is up here, and so on. Now, I'm not saying, and nor would someone who specializes in pivot points say, that it's supposed to bounce between the lines in an orderly way. It can go any way. Maybe Bitcoin just goes through every pivot point really quickly. The point is that they're here to show you some levels to keep in mind, and each level is being calculated on a specific formula, and it's even showing you, as you can see, pivot points all the way up to R5. So hopefully that gives you a basic understanding, but now it's time to dive in a little deeper here. So once you have pivot points added to your chart, you're going to want to head up to the settings menu before you really get going, because it's important that you apply the pivot point indicator to your chart in the way that matters to you. So it says type here and then traditional. Or you could calculate your pivot points based on Fibonacci. Now you can see the pivot points, which are these orange lines, change depending on the type I select. And recall, if you're interested in a specific calculation, it could be Woody, Classic, DM, it could be anything in this dropdown. Just remember that you can always go and get that calculation very quickly by going to Pivot Point Standard. Here it is. Let's hit the tooltip. We are on the Fibonacci version. Here's our calculation. So here's our pivot points. We have P, which is the starting point. It's equal to the previous high plus previous low plus previous close divided by 3. Then every pivot point thereafter is an extension of that initial calculation. And we're getting a feel for what you could say support and resistance are on this time interval at 3 different levels, because we have S1, S2, and S3. We have R1, R2, and R3. So you're getting quite a bit of information here. And if you start to think about it as sort of a quick daily calculation to show you support 1, support 2, support 3, resistance 1, resistance 2, resistance 3 with a click, that's where pivot points really start to become an interesting tool. Now, as we click the settings menu here, I'm just going to go back to traditional. And pivot's time frame is something you're going to want to pay attention to because it's currently set to auto by default. Well, auto is fantastic because if you are on a specific chart or time interval, it'll automatically show you the pivot points for that time interval. So I'm on a daily chart and I've got my pivot points here. But watch this. If I'm looking at a daily chart and I really zoom out all the way back to the start of the year, go to settings, and then I click weekly. Now I'm going to zoom in. What you'll see here is that all the pivot points are being calculated over a full week. So you have all of this pricing data in here, right? And you can see it's kind of confined into these pivot points. Well, that's a full week of pivot points here, full week of pivot points here, full week of pivot points here. If I click settings and now say go to monthly and click OK, well, now you can see the lines are very long, and that's because they are showing me the pivot points for an entire month. So you can always test that. Here's June 1. And on this last day is June 30th. So these are the pivot points for all of June. And with that, I already have some pivot points being calculated for July. Of course, July just started, but now you have historical monthly pivot points here to also work with. So if we click settings, what we can do is add these pivot points to our chart for specific time intervals. So if I wanted to see pivot points for BTC USD by the year, I can click OK. Let's zoom out now. Now you have pivot points for an entire year here, which is really, really interesting to see on a long-term time interval. Now, it is important to say that oftentimes in pivot points, you'll see it technically be used most often at this daily level. So here's your daily pivot points. And the reason why that's the case is because pivot points are often used by traders or risk managers or technicians to get a feel for the levels they should respect, strictly calculated on a formula that is repeatable and that is shown to you on the chart each time, that is easy to understand based off of the price action and the formula that we explored in the indicators, metrics, and strategies menu, and then within the help center. So there's more to learn here, by the way. What I'm going to do is click the settings menu again. I'm going to go to monthly here. Now, number of pivots back is a great tool because, as you can see, right now it's set to 15 by default. So if we count all these pivots for a month, there's 15 of them, all the way back to April 2024. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on until we get to 15. Now, maybe we only want to see 3. Let's make the chart a little easier to read. We can adjust our screen resolution here. 1, 2, 3. Great. Now we have 1 forming for July as well. So as you can see here, you can adjust how many pivot points you want to see just from this number of pivots back box, which you can type into. Now you've also got use daily based values as well. And reminder, if you ever see this tooltip, just go ahead and hover your mouse over it so that you can learn what it means. And to really sort of be, cut to the chase here quick, this is all about after hours or extended hours. Sometimes markets have different hours of trading. They've got their regular trading intervals. They've got their after hours and pre-market intervals. And the question is that you can uncheck it to essentially take into account those other hours. So if extended hours are displayed on the chart, they will be taken into account during the pivot level calculation. That's only when it's unchecked. But if you check it, we're only using the daily values. That's it. So if your market has those different hours, This check will keep you in the regular hours. Now, those are the key features here of pivot points. The next thing to really nail down is, of course, you could, customize your labeling features as well. You can see show labels and price, which is a good reminder, by the way. Labels is your R1, R2, R3. Prices are the actual price of the symbol at each R1, R2, R3, or S1, S2, S3. So Bitcoin at S2, 66,000. Bitcoin at S3, 59,000. Bitcoin at S4, 51,000. Up to you on how you want to display that. You can also show it on the right or on the left. Levels, of course, this is where I think things get rather important is, everyone wants to sort of make their indicator theirs. So whichever colors that you prefer, well, you guessed it, you have the ability here to customize them as needed. And as an example, what I am doing here is I'm changing the S1, S2, S3, S4, S5, support 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to white. And I'm changing the resistance now all to red. And in addition, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to uncheck resistance 5 and uncheck support 5. And let's even do 4 and 4. So now all we're seeing is our p-value, which is the key calculation here to how pivot points are calculated. And then we've got our checks here for S1, S2, S3, and it's white, R1, R2, R3, and it's red. And now we've got our custom look here, and you can sort of think about it as, here's white for support, here's red for resistance. If you're long, might help you visually realize what levels are ahead or below to watch on this daily time interval to this specific calculation, traditional over a full month. You have this ability to do just that. Now, wrapping up here, you've got some style options depending on if you want to even see the lines or the labels. Some people prefer to not have the lines on the chart. They just can see the price levels here, and it's just a feature that they prefer, and it's just a chart look that they would rather have when using this indicator. And then lastly, as you know, visibility is how you can visualize this indicator on specific time intervals. So if you don't want to see it on daily, it's gone now. If you don't want to see it on weeks, months, hours, minutes, but you only want to see it on days, you can check and choose the specific intervals of your choice. So ladies and gentlemen, that's our video about pivot points. We hope that you enjoy this video. Thanks so much for watching as always. Please subscribe. We have several hundred videos covering other indicators as well. So please watch those, read our help center, and we're here to help. So thank you.